Hey all, it's been a couple of days since I've made one of these videos, and what's been keeping me occupied? Well, a bunch of things. As I mentioned in one of the videos before, I do have a day job, and since I was back to that after my holiday, it's taken a little bit of adjusting to get through it, and I mean to get back into it, not get through it, get back into it, and also just a whole bunch of things that have sort of occupied my time at a personal level, and which has meant that I haven't really been able to dedicate as much time as I would like to on my projects. Most particularly the Node TypeScript Crud Notes and the React TypeScript to-do list projects repositories that I've got on GitHub. Now these repositories are one's a React app that uses TypeScript and MUI, Material UI, and the other one is a Node.js API, Node.js Express API, REST API that uses TypeScript for the backend. So I have made some progress on it, and what I've done is I've actually added, I've really fleshed out the backend, the REST API, such that as of in the coming days, I'll start integrating that with the front end. So what I've done is I've added so the idea was to have that React TypeScript to-do list app um, use the Node TypeScript Crud Notes REST API as its backend, and what was missing up until last week was that it lacked the ability to do CRUD tasks like CRUD to do, and even the only thing it had was to save notes and a few APIs such as weather and news. But even for the notes, every time you save a note, the user would be sort of hard coded hard coded JSON string. It wouldn't actually be a reference to a user object or anything as such. So what I've done in the last week is that I've actually updated the API, and I've actually added the ability to CRUD to do as well as CRUD users. And what this does is it CRUDs these entities like user and to do to the database, and the database that I'm using here is the DynamoDB database. It's like because it's deployed in AWS. I've deployed this API on Elastic Beanstalk on AWS, which is Amazon Web Services. So yeah, you can actually you can have a look at the sample code for how to actually use how to CRUD DynamoDB from a Node.js REST API that uses TypeScript. Yeah, and the other thing that I've done is back in the day, I'm showing my age. Back in the day, we had this auto-incrementing primary key, which worked great. So every time you insert a record in the table, the primary key column would be an auto-incrementing primary key, so that each subsequent record will be one more than the last record inserted. So if I insert the first record, it'll be the primary key, the ID, primary key, auto-incrementing primary key ID would be 1, the second record would be 2, and so on and so forth. But now that practice is discouraged these days, and it's because given the distributed nature of how we deploy apps now, like for example, on the cloud like Amazon, like AWS or Azure or GCP or any other cloud provider. I think DigitalOcean is also one of them. So anyway, it's discouraged. So what's encouraged now is that to have the idea is to have like a prefix for your primary key ID from a primary key column. So the primary key that will be for your record that you insert. The way you set it is by generating a primary key. So what I've done is I've gotten each ID for the, say for example todo, each ID would start with an acronym like TD underscore, and then I'll append a unique ID to it, and the unique ID would be the current time in mil. So it's like when you do new date or get time, or like if you're familiar with Java, the equivalent of system, no, what was it? Date dot current time in mils, which gives you a unique time string, and that will always be unique. It's down to the last millisecond. Uh, you can confirm that by looking up the documentation. Anyway, so that's how I've done the primary key column. That's how I'm generating the primary key ID for each record that I insert in the database. So there's one like that for todo, there's one like that for nodes, and there's one like that for user. And every time I insert for example, every time when you insert a todo object, a todo row in the table, a user ID is inserted into it. The user ID uniquely identifies any given user, and so based on that, you can actually, when you retrieve the todo, based on that, based on the data, based on the user ID in that todo, you can actually look up the user. And the same applies if you've got a user. So if a user logs in, we get the user information from the database, and that will give the user ID. You can use that user ID to retrieve all the todos that are assigned to that are created by that user. So for that, while I have implemented that and I've checked in the code, the method there, my method of retrieving it is not very efficient, and that is because I don't understand DynamoDB as well just yet. I'm using this operation called scan. Now scan is actually very inefficient. It's not the best way of retrieving all the records from a database for DynamoDB. It's like a select star where condition, select star from table where condition equals to something. Yeah, so that's one of the things that I will optimize later on. At an early stage for this particular for the app that I'm trying to build, it's not an issue because I won't have such a large volume of users. But it is something that will become an issue later on as say the app grows and the number of users increase. But for now it's okay. So right. Now let me try to summarize this, because I feel like I just started talking about it and then I just jumped into details of the work that I've been doing in the last couple of weeks. Right. So okay, so what have I done in the last few weeks? Apart from the technical stuff that I mentioned, I've actually started creating a plan of what I want this app to turn into, what I want this to shape, how I'm shaping this to be what I want it to be. I've actually got a bit of a plan. It's a solid plan, fairly solid plan. Let's just say fairly solid plan. And what I've done is, as a result of that, I've identified a number of tasks that I would need to do to see this come to life, and I've started creating issues in the GitHub repository for each of the projects. So say I've got two repos on GitHub. One is the React Typescript tutorials, one is the front end app, and the other one is the back end app. And what I'm hoping to do is I'm actually hoping to combine them together in an app that anyone can use. It will be publicly available, and all the code will be on GitHub, so you can see the code for a fully working app. It's all there, like front end to back end, and the way it will all be deployed will be front end will be deployed on AWS S3 bucket, and the back end will be deployed on Elastic Beanstalk, or if I realize Elastic Beanstalk is taking up too much money, I'll try to deploy it to EC2. I haven't used EC2 yet, but nothing that I cannot learn. So when the time comes, I'll look into it. Right, so that's my goal, and how am I going to achieve that goal? The idea is to actually spend an hour or 2 hours every evening and try to do as many things that I possibly can in the limited time that I have got, and dedicate more time to it over the weekend. That's assuming that none of my personal problems come up and bubble up and then sort of take over my time. Anyway, in addition to that, lastly, we'll see how we go. And lastly, there was another problem that I had. I think I talked about it in one of my earlier videos, and that was a kernel panic problem with my Ubuntu 20 when I was trying to upgrade it from Ubuntu 20 to Ubuntu 22. Ubuntu is the Linux distribution that I'm using in my desktop PC where I do most of my development work. So I found a way to solve the kernel panic problem, and I've written a little blog post about it which just focuses on how to solve that problem. So I'll share a link to that in the description of this video, and also I'll share a link to the description of I'll share a link to the GitHub repositories that I've talked about in the description of this video. So please have a go at it, and if you can find the time, help out by either creating a Jira, or better, picking up one of the Jira. Did I say Jira? Sorry, I meant one of the issues. Pick up one of the issues from the GitHub repo. Do that, create a PR, and I'm happy to review it and approve it, and you can merge the code. Or if you can get an idea of how to how to solve a particular problem, and if there's something that you'd like to see, please create an issue in the GitHub repository, or leave a comment in the description of leave a comment on this video on YouTube. So yeah, that's about it, and hopefully the next video that I make doesn't take this long. So that's all for now, and hope you're all well, and happy February, and live long and prosper.